Hi, I'm Angie, and I'm a consultant automation engineer at LexisNexis in Raleigh. We are growing there, so if you or someone you know is looking for a career opportunity, check us out and make sure you tell them that I sent you, okay? I do blog about automation techniques at angiejones.tech, and I'm on Twitter at techgirl1908. So be sure to follow me. If you want to tweet about how I'm doing while I'm talking, I totally won't be offended, okay? What I do at LexisNexis, so I provide strategy for automation techniques to multiple Scrum teams. So I get with the teams, kind of figure out what they're doing, provide the best way to incorporate automation into their strategies, okay? Today I want to talk about the build that cried broken. So I'm basically talking about continuous integration and automated tests within that cycle. All right, so let's talk a little bit about continuous integration. Just make sure we're all on the same page. So continuous integration starts off with development checking in code, basically committing into some code repository, right? And in this check-in process, this initiates the whole CI process where it actually builds with the rest of the code base, and that makes a product, or if you will, like the application, what it will be if we were to actually deploy this. From there, we go on to test that. So these would be automated tests. How many people are doing continuous integration in the room? Awesome. You have these same kind of challenges too? Awesome. All right. So it goes on to test, and in the test, a lot of times we're seeing that these tests are failing, and they're not failing for just cause, right? So that's causing a lot of mistrust between the team members, even the automation engineers themselves are beginning not to trust this build, right? And so the longer that this stays red, the longer no one's paying attention to it. From the test, we then get the report that goes back to the development, and like I said, they start ignoring this after a while if it's always red. Oh, so the little thing in the middle. So Aesop, everybody familiar with Aesop? Aesop Fables guy? Okay, so Aesop, he had all of these great fables, and we apply them to lessons in life. Who knew that even way back then, he had these great lessons that can apply to continuous integration as well. So I'm going to go over some of his lessons and show you how we can use them to improve our continuous integration. So the first one, the shepherd boy and the wolf, or better yet, the boy who cried wolf, right? So there was this shepherd boy, and the shepherd boy, he was responsible for taking care of the sheep, right? Making sure nothing happened to them. Well, the shepherd boy, he was a jokester. So he would go and he would scream, wolf, wolf. And he would want the village people to come run and panic, and he would crack up laughing. This was hysterical to him, right? And so the village people, they fell for this the first couple of times, and after a while they realized that, you know, this guy's a prankster. And so they stopped listening to him. So one time, the wolf really was coming. And the boy cried, wolf, wolf. And guess what? No one came. No one showed up. Unfortunately, the poor sheep, they perished, right? And so this is happening a lot with our continuous integration cycles as well. So our builds are becoming just like this shepherd boy. Our tests are crying wolf, or they're crying broken. And the developers or the village people, they're not paying attention anymore. Okay? So this is not a good state to be in. I also experienced this same kind of thing in real life. So I was working from home one day, and so was my husband, right? And the battery in the smoke detector died or whatever. So it started chirping. It was the most annoying chirp that you've ever heard. You've heard it before, right? And so every like 60 seconds, this thing was beeping. And so my husband, he went and looked to see if we had some spare batteries, which we did not. And I was busy working, and he was busy working, and we just didn't feel like stopping to go get the battery, right? So we just kind of suffered through. And yeah, at first it was really annoying. And after an hour, not that annoying anymore. By the end of the day when we were done working, we didn't even notice this alarm anymore. And so we never changed it. We went like months without changing this until I was on the phone with someone and they were like, what the heck is that noise in the background, right? And so we're becoming desensitized to things that we are hearing or seeing very constantly. And so this is not what you want to happen with your continuous integration builds. The fox and the goat. So there was a fox and he was walking along a path one evening, right? And he got pretty thirsty and he saw this well of water and he jumped into the water and he began to drink the water. Water was delicious, all right? So after he finished, he quenched his thirst, he realized, oh crap, I can't get out of here. Like this well is pretty deep. And so he tried and tried to get out of the well and he couldn't get out. So he had to end up spending the night there, right? Next morning, goat walked by this same path, heard a little noise in the well, and the goat looked down, said, what are you doing in there, Mr. Fox? The fox said, oh, I'm drinking this delicious water. Jump on in. Come on, get some. And so the fox jumped in and began to drink the water as well. The goat jumped in. The goat jumped in. And then the fox jumped on the goat's back and leaped out of the well, right? So the moral of this story is to look before you leap. In our automation strategies, a lot of us are just jumping in head first. We are not even sure of what's the complete strategy. What is it that we're trying to achieve here, right? So look at your long-term plans. Automation is not the end goal. What is it that you're trying to accomplish? If it's within continuous integration, then you're probably wanting fast feedback when developers check in code. You want to make sure that the product is still in a healthy state, right? So in doing that, that should shape how you do your automation and why, right? So you want to make sure what you're doing is in line with that goal, okay? The lioness and the vixen. So the lioness and the vixen, they're both mothers, right? So they go out one spring day, beautiful day like today, and they're hanging out and they're kind of bragging on their children like mothers do. And the vixen is saying, yeah, my kids, they're so smart and they're always playing tricks on each other and yada, yada, yada. And the lioness is saying, oh yeah, and my boy, he's getting big, he's getting strong, his coat is really shiny. And then the vixen, she steps out of line a little bit, starts talking out the side of her mouth, right? So she says, she wants to one-up the lioness. So she says, yeah, your boy's cute or whatever, but, you know, I have a whole litter when I have my kids. You know, they have people to play with, et cetera, et cetera. The lioness looks, and she's like, okay. She holds her head up very high and says, yeah, I have the one, but he's a lion. Okay? Moral of that story is quality over quantity, right? So in automation, how many of your managers are very impressed by the number of scripts that you've written, right? And so they're constantly tracking this, they're reporting it up to the higher managers. We have all of these tests, yada, 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 yada. Who cares, right? So you want to make sure that you are automating quality tests. Who cares about the quantity, right? So you want to make sure what you're doing is providing value, especially in a continuous integration cycle. So think about it, fast feedback. Think about what's our purpose again, right? And so we want to provide the best value to our developers. How many times have a developer changed something in the application, the test ran, and then there was a whole bulk of them that failed because of that change? That should be a sign to you that that's too dense. You have too much going on. Why are you testing? Why are all of these tests testing the same thing? One test could have told the developer the exact same information. So just be conscious of this. The more tests you have, the slower that continuous integration process is going to be. And remember, the key here is fast feedback. So just be mindful of that. Quality over quantity. And in speaking with quality, we want to make sure that the tests that we are adding in here are of quality. So the fastest way to lose trust in your continuous integration builds is to have flaky tests. How many people are struggling with these? Don't lie, right? So we all are. I mean, this is just the nature of the beast, right? And so I want to spend just a moment on managing flaky tests. I mentor and help train a lot of newer automation engineers. And so I have like a few of these kind of techniques that I share with them to be able to manage their tests. One is stable identifiers. So we all know about this. We learned this a long time ago about IDs being the best way to get an element, a handle to an element, or look for the name, and then we can use this locator, that locator, blah, 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 right? We all learned that. The game is changing though, right? With these fancy JavaScript, UIs, things are changing. He's laughing because he knows I'm telling the truth, right? And so when we used to have this static web page, this was fine. Get the ID, I'm good. Getting the ID is not always enough anymore. So you need to make sure that you're thinking about the way that this web page can change, right? What's the dynamics with this element? Getting the ID when that element is now invisible on the page, is that very helpful? Not really, right? And so we have to be more conscious of using the other types of ways to get it. So you can use the ID, but use that in maybe like a CSS selector or XPath function or something to make sure that you're getting a stable identifier. Also, intelligent weighting. So Simon talked about this a bit in his keynote, right? Make sure that we are weighting intelligently. So we don't want hard-coded weights. This is also something that we learned a long time ago. If you're adding sleeps to your code, it's time to wake up, people, okay? Get those sleeps out of there. We want to be intelligent because as soon as you try to accommodate for the one machine that you're developing on, as soon as you put that on the bill and it's running against some other machine, that doesn't work anymore. So you want to wait for conditional type of weights, right? So wait for maybe if you click a button and there's some type of spinner icon or something, let's wait until that disappears. We've also worked with our developers a lot to make sure that the application itself is automatable. So we've added, or we've had them to add, AJAX counters in the DOM, right? And so anytime a developer is doing something that is invoking AJAX, they have to increment this counter. And when that's done, then they decrement it, right? And so we can do things like wait until the AJAX counter is at 0. So even though nothing is really happening on the page itself that I can visually see, I have things in the DOM that I can wait on. That'll be more stable, okay? Source of truth. So consulting a source of truth. Test data management. How many people are struggling with this? If you all don't raise your hand, I'm just not going to believe anything you say. All right. So we're all struggling with this. Industry leaders are struggling with this. We're all trying to figure out how to do this better. What I see is people will make assumptions about the state of the application when they're developing their test, right? So you develop a test, and let's say, for example, it's querying for a movie or something, some search for a movie, right? And so you populated the test data in your environment. So you know what movies are there. And so this should be a pretty solid, pretty stable test. So you search for this one movie, you get one result back, you assert on that one, everything is great. Until 6 months down the line, one of your coworkers adds a movie, the sequel, right? And so there's a part 2 of this thing. You search for that, and now there's 2 that's showing up. All of a sudden, your test that was so stable is now breaking. Right? That's kind of no fault of your own, except that you made an assumption there. So instead of hard coding things like that and being very reliant on the test data in the state of the application at the time that I'm developing, I look for a source of truth to consult. So that might be a web service, that might be a database. And so if I wrote that same test, instead of saying that I expect 1 back, I make a query to a web service. How many of these should come back? 2 should come back, okay? On the UI, how many do we have? 2. And then I can assert on that. So even if it's 1 or 2, that'll be great, and that'll be fine, and it won't break on me. All right? Last thing, shortcuts. So my coworker Michelle is here. Michelle, wave to everyone. She's so shy, I'm sorry. So Michelle, she was very impressed with some of the shortcuts that we introduced into the framework very recently. So being able to not do everything on the UI, and I talked a little bit about this, I talked a lot about this in my last Selenium talk in London, where you don't have to do every single thing on the UI, right? And so your test, it can blend multiple layers of Mike Cohn's automation pyramid. And so introducing things like using web services to set up your data, or instead of going through the menu and all of these different pages to get to the page that you want to get on, look in the URL address bar, right? Is there a direct URL for where you're trying to go? Launch that. Why go through all the navigation steps, right? And so this will help you make your test faster, which is what we want in continuous integration, and also less brittle, all right? So those are my tips on managing flaky tests. Of course, there are more, but these are my go-tos. All right, story time. All right, so there was an astrologer, and he was so deep, all right? So he would look up into the sky. He would go out at night, and he would look up into the sky, and he would stare at the stars, and he would make predictions about the future, and he would do this every night, right? And so one night he was doing it, he was so deep into thought and staring at the sky that he fell into this hole, like if I were to fall off this stage, right? So that kind of thing. And so everyone laughed at him like, oh my God, this guy is like so into telling the future and he didn't even know what's in front of him, right? So the moral of the story is to make sure that you're paying attention to your present state as well as the future. So I talked about look before you leap, so make sure you understand the future that you're working toward. However, you also need to make sure you're paying attention to your current state. There are so many teams where everyone is so heads down in automating the new features, right? So we want to get our newer future things out of the door. However, no one is looking at the state of the automation right now. And it's broken. The bills are red. Why are we writing new code when the bills are red? Like, I just don't understand that. Don't value new code over working code, right? And so we need to make sure we're paying attention. The way that we've done this in the past. So just a little bit of context about the experience I'm talking about. This was a team that had 4,000 automated tests, and they were very broken, okay? And so we had to get together and put our heads together and come up with a way to solve this. One way that we came up with was having sprint tasks. So these tasks, we would add to the sprint, and someone would have to monitor the bill. It would be called bill monitoring, right? Not glamorous work. Nobody's a fan of it. Management doesn't want to hear it. The automation folks don't really want to do it. But in my experience, this is something that has been critical to getting us to reliable, trustworthy bills. Now, the way it works is someone would take the task. This could be anyone. This could be developers. This could be test engineers who wanted to know more about automation and kind of get their hands dirty a little bit. Or it could be the automation engineers itself. Now, notice I said could be. It was always us, the automation engineers, who did this work. Now, we would take a task, and you basically were on duty for that week, 1 week. So the sprints were 2 weeks, so 2 people would end up having this task. Now, what you would need to do in that week was monitor the bill. That was your primary focus. If you could do other work as well, then that's fine, but your primary focus was on monitoring the bills. And so that was just triaging, making sure that any breaks were real breaks and not faulty tests, okay? I was on a webinar done by Paul Merrill. He's a good friend of mine out of North Carolina. And the webinar was titled something like, how do you start automation or something like that. Which test do I automate first, I think is the name of it. Okay, and so there were a lot of newer automation people who wanted to get into automation on their teams on this call. And so Paul got to talking about starting off small. He said you write one automation test and then go ahead and put that on a build and make sure that works. And then you do the next one and yada, yada, yada. So like I said, Paul is my friend and we talk a lot and we're pretty much on the same page most of the time, but I'm thinking, what the heck is Paul talking about? Like, why would a new automation engineer put their stuff out for everyone to see? Usually when you're a new automation engineer is when you're making those mistakes, when you have the unstable tests, the fragile ones. And so why would we publish that and basically build mistrust right off the bat? So Paul's talking about it, and I just couldn't hold my tongue anymore. And so I was like, Paul, let me ask you a question. Don't you think that that would jeopardize what you're doing, kind of hurt your mission, right? And Paul was like, oh God, no, that's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is to add it to a bill, but it doesn't necessarily have to be public. So this can be a private bill that you are watching and maintaining yourself. So I was like, what? Like, okay, that makes sense, Paul. I like that. So have the bill yourself and you build trust. Stop showing people your ugly baby, right? Make sure that it blossoms into a swan first before you try to share this with the world. Don't tell anybody what you're doing. Do this on your own machine. All right? Other thing that we tried, we use a database, very simple database. One table, MySQL. These were the columns. And basically, after every test was run, our automation framework would insert a record into this database. So the reason for this, it was so difficult. Whoever was on that build duty, oh my God, it was so difficult. So like I said, we were in very bad shape. Like we had hundreds of these tests failing, right? And so with that, you didn't know where to begin. You would look at it and everything's red and you're just like, oh my God, I don't know. And so what we did was, given this information, we could keep statistics about the test. And then that would help you make sense of what it is that you had there, right? So given that, we also developed like this UI interface where you could do certain queries to get the information in a prioritized list. For example, maybe show me my most, I don't want to say unstable, but most likely to fail tests, right? Show me those first. So that could indicate that, hey, these tests are the ones that are most flaky, or it could indicate a problem with the application. Maybe those tests are failing with just cause, right? And so if they're constantly failing, sometimes they fail, sometimes they don't, but it's nothing on our end, that indicates that there's a problem with the application around that area. So that was really valuable information. Another use of this was, show me all the tests where this is the very first build that they've ever failed. Ooh, right? So these have been running for forever and they've been beautiful, and then all of a sudden now they're failing. That indicates there could be very well something wrong with the application. So we were able to put in a lot of good queries like that and be able to make sense of this information that we had. The farmer and the stork. Okay, so the farmer, he would plant seeds for his new crop, and every time he would plant seeds, these crane birds would come and they would eat the seeds up, right? And he would get so upset. And so he had a plan for them the very next time they came. Now, the very next time they were coming, the crane birds, they saw a stork on the way. And so they said, oh, hey, stork, come on, join us. We're going to eat. Free food, all that jazz, right? And so the stork's like, okay, yeah, I'm in. So they went to the farm, and when the stork saw what they were doing, basically stealing, the stork was like, oh, no, I don't want any parts of that. But remember, the farmer had a plan. So he cast a net, and he caught all of these birds. And so the stork began to cry and say, oh, my God, it wasn't me. This is my first time here. I took no parts in it. And the farmer's like, I don't care. You were with them. Birds of a feather flock together, right? So we've all heard this, guilty by association. Or one red apple spoils the bunch. This is much like our continuous integration test. All it takes is one flaky test and the whole build is red and nobody trusts it. No one cares that it's just one flaky test, right? No one cares. So what we did, we realized this because we were working so hard to get these hundreds of tests in a reliable state, right? And so we would fix some, and let's say we knocked it down. After your 1 week, you knocked it down from 100 to 80. So no one still trusted the build. There were still 80 of them that were red, right, for no good reason. So what we did was we separated these out into two, well, more than two, but basically two paths. One path was for our stable, reliable tests, meaning they only failed when something was wrong. Okay, these were the ones that we could trust. And then we also had a build for unstable tests. So these were tests that if they failed, they were probably flaky. So we triaged them, knew that it wasn't a bug, it was something wrong with the test. And then we also had another group for bugs. So these tests were failing with just cause. We have a defect opened on them. We don't want them running in that one, right? So we want to know about them. And we kept both of these running, these red ones. We keep them running, but again, go to that whole private kind of thing. We keep it out of the sight of the developers. So the developers, they get to pay attention to the build that makes sense, the one that's stable for them, the one that's actually providing good, trustable information. And we pay attention to those red ones, right? So we kept them running because we wanted to, one, still get information about the intermittents, and we also wanted it to be visible to us as well. So we wanted to keep track of the technical debt that we were accruing because all of these unstable tests have to be looked at some point, right? So we made a promise to ourselves that we would not allow that to get over a certain number. So 60 was our magic number, which was 1.5% of the total, right? And that's pretty good because Google has 3%. So we felt pretty good about that. So in looking at this, if it ever got over 60, we weren't doing any new automation work. Everyone had to stop and we had to get this back on track, okay? Now, this is how we annotated those tests. We would just use, you see the groups equals unstable, so that's how we would annotate it to say that this was an unstable test. And that would, we would set up our continuous integration tool to not run those in that trustworthy build plan, okay? For every test that was unstable, we also added a ticket to the backlog, a task. And so this was letting everyone know, here's the technical debt that we do have. And it needs to be prioritized with the new feature work. And so when automation engineers, or when we were picking up stories and we were allocating automation engineers to those, we would also prioritize these based on the importance of the test, the value of the test. How quickly do we need to get that back to the green bucket, right? And this was the kind of thing that the person who's on build duty would take care of. So this would be their life, triaging the builds and working on those unstable tests to get them back stable. And then we had our little cheat sheet. So this was the things that we could look at to see if given one of these, could we get that test back green? Okay. Another thing, when triaging, when trying to fix the unstable test, right? I don't know about you all, but sometimes you're working on like a test. It's not one that you've written, of course, but someone else has written. And it's like spaghetti code, right? So you're trying to patch this thing up. You're trying to figure out, like, what is this thing even doing, right? And so one of my mentors, Richard Bradshaw, he's all about, like, deleting stuff. Like, he's a Control-A, delete type of dude, right? And so I'm not that brave. Like, I'm scared to even delete, like, comments or whatever. But one day I was working on a test, and I was trying to patch it a little bit, let me change this, and it wasn't working. I could not get this thing to work. And this guy, Dr. Aesop Fable, he did a talk at Google Test Automation Conference, the last one. And he's actually a computer science professor over at the University of Maryland. And he worked at Google for one summer, and his job was to analyze what are the behaviors that kind of cause flaky tests. And one of the things that stood out to me, he realized that as soon as it gets to like 3 unique people who have touched a test, all of a sudden the flakiness probability increases, right? And so I was hearing this guy in my head say that, and I was like, I bet I'm number 4 or something. And then I could also hear Richard in his British accent saying, delete the test, just delete it, right? And so I did it. I deleted the test because I understood the purpose of the test. Now, I didn't just delete it and move on with my life, but I rewrote the test, right? With a clear mind, I'm not trying to patch something and make it work. So I rewrote the test. It took me an hour when I was trying to patch it and get it to work, and I never could get it after an hour. It took me 25 minutes to rewrite that test, right, with a clear mind, and it went from like 113 lines of code to 38. And it's running pretty good, so I feel good about that. I guess Richard's right. All right, the dog and the hare, last story. So the dog and the hare, they were playing around. They just met, right? And so they wanted to play chase. And so the hare was convinced that he was faster than the dog, so he said, catch me, catch me. And so the dog was running behind the hare, and the dog, he would catch him, and the first time he would catch him, he might just, kind of play, will paw a little bit, right? The next time he would catch him, he would bite him, and the hare's like, what are you doing, dude? And so this went on for a couple of rounds where the hare's like, listen, I can't trust you. I don't know if you're friend or foe, right? Sometimes you bite me, sometimes you don't. And so we don't want this to happen with our automation suites, our continuous integration pipelines. We don't want to get them into a beautiful shape where everyone is trusting us again. And then as soon as we start adding new tests, those are unflaky as well, right? So we want to maintain the team's trust. And so some ways we did that, we had people on teams who may be new to automation engineering, or maybe they're straight up just not that great at it. And so they would add tests that were kind of known to be flaky, right? They weren't following the guidelines. So people like that, we kind of put them in that little private build first, right? So add your test here before you get to play with the big dogs. You put your test here and prove that it is stable, right? Another thing, when we are fixing the unstable test, if you're not so sure, how many of you have become like this developer mindset that we hate? Well, it works on my machine when dealing with automation tests, right? And so it works here, but it's not working on that build, and you cannot get it to fail. So you go ahead and you make a tweak that you think might be it, and you cross your fingers. We don't play that. So we're not putting those back in that build. Keep them in this red build and let them run. Let them prove their work. Let them run maybe about 10 times, stable, and show that, okay, yeah, it's working now. I can move it over to the green build now, okay? So how the story ends, we had 4,000 automated tests, like I said. We made sure that less than 1.5% were unstable at any time. We never got to 0. It's a constant chase. Make sure that the main build, so that's what we did to help with that chase. We had one reliable stack and other stacks that we knew were not. And so the reliable stack was always green unless there was a change with the application. So when it was red for just cause. We got to the point where we didn't have to maintain that anymore. Developers could maintain it. They could be the ones looking at this to see if it's red. And everyone trusts that build for feedback. Once we got to that point, everyone was on board. They knew that if it was red, it meant something, okay? I have about 5 minutes. Any questions? Yes. So testing across different environments, how do you keep that stable, you mean? Right. So you need to account for all of those. We make our tests so that they are independent of that kind of information, right? And so the only thing that we really saw was different between the environments would be the timing that something might take. So again, that went to the conditional weights as opposed to the hard-coded sleeps. And other things like OS and stuff, we didn't find that caused any churn in my experience. Yes?
You were storing your test results in a test database for all your runs for the framework. Did you be able to disseminate between production runs against real code and testers just testing out their code?
Runs against real code. Do you mean like production code?
So like if I just took everything that ran through my framework and stuck it in the database, a lot of that stuff would be developers, or testers.
Oh, right. Right. So we would turn the feature off. We had like a little flag, and we would turn it off when we were running locally. So that didn't count. So it only did that if it was running on the CI. Yeah. Yes? Yes, so to move it over, you couldn't blindly do it, right? You had to go in and you had to triage that, and you had to prove to yourself that it was not a real bug, right? Otherwise, we could throw really big bugs over there without knowing it. And so we would run it manually on the UI and make sure that it wasn't a bug. And then we say, okay, it's our code. I don't have time to fix this right now, so that we throw it over. Now, if it was something that we could fix very easily, like maybe you see, oh, the ID changed. Okay, change the ID and get that going again. That's fine. But if it was something bigger that we didn't have time for and it's out of scope, then it went to that build. Yes?
Test. What do you do about if you have a test that is known not to be flaky, but it does mess up and give a false negative? Is there anything that you would recommend to do about that?
Why is it not flaky then?
Well, it may...
Are you in denial?
Maybe. But like, if you've tested it before and it's all seemed to be good, but thanks to like a really obscure bug, it just suddenly comes up red, how do you minimize the damage that that does to perception?
We move it out. So even if it's like, I think what you're saying is this could be a bug, but it's one of those intermittent ones where maybe it's not failing this time. We move it out and then we make a note to ourselves, like that might be a subtask in that whole triage task, to monitor that specific test. So you want to watch that one very carefully. And sometimes we would even run like maybe one of those private builds, run that one over and over and over again to try to get more information about when it's failing. Is it like every 10 times or like what's going on? All right. I think one or two more questions. Anybody else? In the back? That's a long answer. Can you find me after this? Okay. Any other questions? Okay, great. You have one? Okay.
So you mentioned something like you use Ajax counter to track Ajax request. Why are you guys doing that? Because for Angular or jQuery, you could check whether the jQuery is active or not, or for Angular, you could just check pending request is 0. So.
Yeah, it wasn't an Angular application. I can't remember what it was, but we needed this. We needed this. We couldn't get the information otherwise, and so we worked with the developers to kind of explore what was the best approach to be able to handle this, right? And so this was their recommendation on how they may be able to do that. So I don't know like all the deep details on why they did that, but I know that these are smart people and that they explore these other avenues because they weren't crazy about doing this anyway, and they realized that this was the best approach, and so I trust them. All right. If anyone else has questions or you think of something later, again, you can find me at angiejones.tech. You can email me there. You can subscribe. You can tweet me. And I'll be here for the entire conference. So come and find me if you want to talk. All right? Thank you so much.
Thank you, Angie. You're the best.